St George's Day, and there's this vague idea amongst the English taxpayers of this country that St George is something special, which of course he is. He's our patron saint. Now, the liberal elite do not like St George. They loathe everything that gives or could give the native people of this country a bit of backbone, a bit of fibre, a bit of pride and self-confidence to enable them, us, to stand up and say, we will not be pushed around any longer. We will not be second-class citizens in our country any longer. We will not remain silently the people who are only dealt with by the politicians and the ruling elite when they want our taxes. We want a say in running our own country. And something as insubstantial, as mythical as a patron saint is the kind of thing which can spark that change of mentality in an oppressed people, which is what we are. So they want, if possible, to do away with the very idea of St George. And for years, he was a non-person, not celebrated anywhere. But then it's become, from the grassroots up, over the last, 10 years, particularly 5 years, there's St George flags everywhere. There's St George shirts on youngsters everywhere. It's not something which a few old fuddy-duddies would do wearing a red rose on April 23rd. It's something that almost every set of young kids do every single day of their lives in terms of the clothes that they wear, the colours they identify with and so on. So there's this increasing feeling that, yeah, there is something about St George. There is something about being English. And yes, there is. And so the liberal elite have gone from trying to ignore it, they're now trying to pervert it and twist it, as they pervert and twist everything they touch. And the latest you probably heard is they'll say time and time again, oh, St George, isn't it funny, the stupid English have a patron saint who's actually Turkish. Ha, 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 how stupid they are. Which isn't the case. St George came from what is now Turkey. But St George was most definitely not Turkish, because there were no Turks in what is now Turkey when St George lived and died. Because the Turks arrived hundreds of years afterwards as conquerors, as immigrants. And so, far from St George being a Turk, and therefore wholly unsuitable for English people who want to preserve their own national identity against a flood from the Third World, and in particular the growing Islamisation of the West, far from being inappropriate, St George is actually the most appropriate patron saint this country could have, because he's the patron saint, really, of people who've lost their own countries through mass immigration. He lost his Turkey, now we're losing our England. He's the perfect patron saint for us in this time. Even when the liberal elite and the BBC and so on, they sneer at St George and they say, of course he never really existed and the dragon never really existed. Yeah, that sneer is mirrored in the way that in the last census, we didn't even exist. The name English wasn't even on the census. People have had to fight tooth and nail even to get us recognised. And unless we, in a multicultural society, unless your group is recognised, then you cannot begin to prove that you're being discriminated against. You can't say, look at the crime statistics, as we've looked recently. Look at these and you will find that our people are overwhelmingly the victims. If there are no statistics about us, there's no way of proving that we're hard done by, of proving that things are wrong, of proving that things need to be put right. And turning the English into a non-people in our own country, which is what the liberal elite has been doing relentlessly in recent decades, is only mirrored by when they say, well, St George never really existed. And of course, St George doesn't exist. There is no St George out there coming to our rescue. There's no knight on a big white horse with shining armour out there. To that extent, it's true. There is no physical St George out there. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a St George in emotion, in spirit, in the power to change things. St George is not out there on a white horse, but St George exists in every single one of you, in every single one of your friends and relatives and neighbours, in every person of indigenous stock in this country. St George is not sleeping, not non-existent. He's alive and wakening up. He's in here and he's in here. Never forget, you are St George.
Hear, hear.